Burkina Faso didn't hold a press conference. It didn't ask for applause. It simply stopped asking for aid, for loans, for permission. No one saw it coming. And now the world is afraid of what it might inspire. This isn't rebellion. It's something more dangerous: self-respect. They didn't riot. They didn't rebel. They just stopped asking. No loud speeches. No international press. No IMF panels. Burkina Faso, one of the world's poorest nations on paper, did something most wealthy nations wouldn't dare. It shut the door on foreign aid. No new loans. No fresh grants. No humanitarian support wrapped in fine print. Just a quiet, deliberate exit from the system designed to save it. And here's the twist. It didn't collapse. It rose. While other nations attended donor conferences and begged for relief, Burkina Faso launched its own plan, not with billions, but with belief. No one expected it, because the entire aid model depends on one myth: that the global South cannot stand without the global North. But Traore and his administration just shattered that illusion by refusing aid not out of arrogance, but out of exhaustion. Decades of imported food that killed local farming. Donor schools that taught colonial worldviews. Roads that led nowhere but debt. And then they said, enough. But this isn't a story of collapse. It's a story of correction. Gold that once vanished into foreign vaults is now being refined locally. Rice once shipped in is now grown and exported by Burkinabe hands. Aid no longer dictates policy, sovereignty does. And that's why the world is worried. Because Burkina Faso's rebellion didn't begin with weapons. It began with a whisper. We already had what we needed, we just had to stop giving it away. When Burkina Faso walked away from foreign aid, the West didn't panic at first. They smiled politely, called it a symbolic gesture. Assumed the country would come crawling back in a month. But it didn't. Instead, something else happened, something far more dangerous than sanctions or rebellion. Other nations started paying attention. Across the Sahel, leaders began asking quiet questions. What if we did the same? What if we stopped borrowing to survive? What if aid wasn't help, but a leash? And suddenly, the IMF wasn't just dealing with spreadsheets. It was dealing with sparks. Because the truth is, foreign aid was never free. It came with papers, with clauses, with advisors flown in to recommend the right direction, which always seemed to lead back to foreign banks, foreign corporations, and foreign hands in local pockets. But now, in Burkina Faso, schools are being built using local blueprints. Water wells are being dug with community labor, not imported consultants. And electricity? Burkinabe engineers are wiring entire districts using refurbished solar tech scavenged from discarded European panels. It's not glamorous. It's not perfect. But it's theirs. And that, more than anything, is the threat. Because what happens when a nation refuses to be pitted? When it doesn't beg, but builds. When it stops saying, we need help, and starts asking, why did we ever think we didn't have power? That's what scares the West. Not a military. Not a missile. But a mindset. Because if one poor, landlocked, war-torn country can say no to billions, and still stand, then every other nation holding a begging bowl might drop it too. And if that happens, the entire global balance shifts. Not with bullets, but with belief. When a country rejects aid, the world expects collapse. Food shortages. Currency crashes. Civil unrest. But in Burkina Faso, collapse didn't come. Construction did. In the weeks following the rejection of international aid, something strange began happening across villages and towns. Abandoned government buildings were reopened as training centers. Old community halls became field schools. Farmers stopped waiting for subsidies and started trading among themselves. And slowly, a phrase began circulating. We build with what we have. This wasn't policy. It was culture. A rebellion of habit. In a dusty corner of Tenkadogo, a woman named Aissata, once a cleaner in a failed NGO clinic, started running a co-op. She grows rice on half an acre, trades half her harvest for medicine, and the rest goes to feeding a nearby school built from scrap metal and mud brick. No loans. No consultants. No branding. Just function. Elsewhere, an electrician named Ausmain started rewiring homes using discarded lithium battery packs from old Chinese bikes. He calls it solar recycling, and it now powers half of his neighborhood. Traore didn't announce a grand policy. He didn't hold economic summits. He simply told his ministers, "Don't build what we can't maintain. Don't buy what we can repair. Don't wait for help that never came." Instead of PPPs and debt-backed infrastructure, Burkina Faso went local. Bricks made from compressed clay, dried in sun. Roads resurfaced with volcanic gravel, not imported asphalt. Medicines grown from local herbs, studied in homegrown labs. It sounds primitive, but here's the twist. It works. Because it's not about catching up with the West. It's about building something that doesn't collapse when the West pulls the plug. Meanwhile, global institutions are watching with quiet dread. At the World Bank, a leaked memo read, Burkina Faso's rejection of aid has sparked copycat models in Mali and parts of Togo. If spread continues, it could destabilize donor leverage across West Africa. Translation? If this catches on, we lose control. And the IMF? They've stopped sending proposals. They've started sending warnings. Even ECOWAS, pressured by external voices, began questioning Burkina Faso's eligibility in joint programs. But Traore didn't budge. When asked if Burkina Faso would rejoin the international community, he replied, "We never left the world. We just stopped letting it tell us who we are." That line hit harder than any policy paper. Because it wasn't just anti-West. It was post-dependence. Across the continent, youth leaders are now quoting Traore, not as a president, but as a philosophy. In Ghana, a student collective began designing curricula rooted in local history, rejecting colonial textbooks. In Senegal, informal barter networks are popping up in border towns, inspired by Burkina's village trade models. The world hoped this was an isolated moment. But it's turning into a regional idea. And Western media? Mostly silent. Because you can't spin a story where the villain is the absence of control. They can't say Traore is corrupt, he's not taking anything. They can't say the model is failing, because it's feeding more mouths than ever. They can't call it dangerous, because there are no weapons involved. Just people. Working. Building. Owning. In a world obsessed with metrics and models, Burkina Faso is telling a simpler story. What if dignity was the economy? And that scares them more than any war. The aid didn't come. The debt didn't come. And yet, somehow, the collapse never came either. What came instead was silence. The kind of silence that scares empires more than gunfire. Because Burkina Faso didn't fall. It flourished quietly. Not in the ways economists love. Not in stock markets or capital flows. But in fields. In factories. In faces that used to look defeated, now determined. And that shift, more than any policy or headline, is what made the West nervous. Because the question is no longer, will this work? What happens if others try? In Washington, policy analysts began using a new phrase behind closed doors. Uncontrolled regional modeling. What does that mean? It means one country doing something unapproved, and another country copying it. Then another, until the whole model, the debt for order model, the donation for compliance model, begins to crack. That's why, even now, there are whispers of soft interventions being planned. Not troops, not tanks, but offers, backdoor calls, bilateral support programs. Advisors flown in with smiles and folders titled Cooperation. Because aid, when weaponized, doesn't look like war. It looks like help. But Traore sees it. And more importantly, so do his people. One villager put it best. They used to come with weapons. Now they come with PowerPoint. But the goal is the same, keep us small enough to manage. So how do you fight that? With visibility. Burkina Faso began live-streaming its town hall meetings. Villagers debating fuel ration plans. Women rewriting food distribution rules. Young men designing bus routes with chalk and thread. It wasn't performative. It was real. And that made it powerful. Because when your own people see how you're building, they protect it. Not because they were told to, but because they helped lay the first stone. Meanwhile, outside powers continue to look for weak points. Where's the opposition? Where's the coup? Where's the collapse? But none of it's coming. Because what's being built in Burkina Faso is not a regime. It's a rhythm. And rhythms don't fall when leaders fall. They echo. Already, whispers are being heard in Guinea. In South Sudan. Not revolutions with rifles, but with refusal. Refusal to trade self-respect for soft money. Refusal to believe poverty means powerlessness. And maybe that's the real fear. That this won't stop with one country. That Burkina Faso is just chapter 1 in a story that threatens to rewrite the global order, not with guns, but with grounded pride. The West isn't afraid of a failed state. It's afraid of a free one. Because when a country like Burkina Faso, war-torn, sanctioned, cornered, rises without help, what excuse does everyone else have? And so, the world continues watching. Some with curiosity, some with admiration, others with plans. But none of them can stop what's already happening. A generation waking up, not to protest, but to produce, to build, to barter, to own. Because sometimes, the most dangerous rebellion is one that doesn't need a savior.